Welcome to Desert Bloodline, a Western novel. Written by Ken Cannon. Narrated by Richard Pulsifer. Copyright 2023 by BrooksAudiobooks.com and Shadowplay Communications, LLC. All rights reserved. No portion of this book may be reproduced in any form without written permission from the publisher or author. Visit BrooksAudiobooks.com for updates on the availability of new books and a special free offer. Chapter 1. He's almost dead. The words jolted Matt Langford back to consciousness. He opened his eyes to the vast desert that had overwhelmed him with its deceptive purple distance. A group of men stood nearby, discussing whether to leave him there. "He's the one sent to spy out the cattle thieves in southern Utah. Beale's outlaws are after him," one of them said. The gray-bearded giant, August Justice, replied resolutely, "I will not go a hair's breadth out of my way for Beale or any other man. You forget your religion. I see my duty to God." Jacob Severino, a little man, bitterly replied, "You would cast the scriptures in my teeth and liken this man to one who went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves. But I've suffered enough at the hands of Beale." As Langford lay there, he realized he was still in the land of the Mormons. The formal speech and biblical references reminded him of the last few days' hard experience and the stern reality of the present. "Jacob Severino, I hold to the spirit of our fathers," replied Justice, like one reading from the Old Testament. "They came into this desert land to worship and multiply in peace. They conquered the desert, prospered with the years that brought settlers, cattlemen, sheep-herders, all hostile to their religion and livelihood. Nor did they ever fail to succor the sick and unfortunate. What are our toils and perils compared to theirs? Why should we forsake the path of duty and turn from mercy because of a cutthroat outlaw? I like not the sign of the times, but I am a Mormon. I trust in God." Severino retorted, "August Justice, I am a Mormon too, but my hands are stained with blood. If you want to keep your waterholes and cattle, you better be on guard. The Holderness gang is slowly creeping towards you, disregarding your water rights and stealing your livestock. Beale and his band are also a threat, and they're not far away." August Justice and Severino were scanning the desert when Severino suddenly pointed out Beale's group under the red wall, not even 10 miles away. The desert was gray in the foreground, purple in the distance, and sloped to the west. The red mountain rampart was a bold sight, and it shut out the north. Little puffs of dust rose above the white sage, and creeping specks moved at a snail's pace. Severino believed that the red sunset was a sign of bloodshed, and his fear spread to the others. The April sky was dark except for a strip of pale blue in the west, where several clouds of striking color and shape floated. They were dyed in the desert's sunset crimson, and the largest cloud projected from behind the dark cloud bank in the shape of a huge fist. The others were small and round, floating below. To Severino it looked like a giant hand, clutching a bleeding heart with inexorable strength. His companions were equally terrified as they watched the sinister color fade and the sky turn purple, as if mirroring the desert floor. As the sun set, a golden shaft shot up, only to be quickly blotted out by a sudden darkening change. August Justice spoke up. "That may be God's will, so be it. Jacob Severino, take your men and go." With a half-oath and half-prayer, Severino and his men rode off in a cloud of yellow dust, the rattle of stirrups, the creak of saddles, and the clink of spurs echoing in their wake. Matt Langford, weak and leaning against a sagebush, managed a wan smile. "I fear your generous act can't save me. May bring you harm. I'd rather you left me, seeing you have women in your party." "Don't try to talk yet," August Justice said, holding a flask to Langford's lips. "You're faint. Here, drink." As Justice's men made camp, unhitching wagon teams, hobbling and feeding horses, and unpacking supplies, Justice himself appeared lost in deep meditation or prayer. His gaze was fixed on a ridge to the east where the desert line met the pale blue sky, and he neither spoke nor stirred for a long time. At length, Justice raked out red coals and placed iron pots in position to assist the women who were preparing the evening meal. As the cool wind blew in from the desert, rustling the sage, sifting the sand, and fanning the dull coals to burning opals, twilight failed and night fell. One by one great stars shone out, cold and bright. The desert wolves howled in hunger from the blackness beyond the camp. Justice called out to his sons to come and eat as he added more greasewood to the fire. His sons were young, wiry, and had the same bronze skin, steel eyes, and hard lines that made it impossible for Langford to tell them apart. The women were comely and serious, with one middle-aged and the others young. When the Mormon called out for mescal, a slender girl appeared from one of the covered wagons, straight as an Indian and dark as night. As August Justice knelt down and his family bowed their heads, Langford found himself unable to control the emotions that stirred within him. He had learned to hate the Mormons with a passion in the past 48 hours, but in the presence of this austere man that hatred dissipated, replaced by something warm and living. He did not want to die in bitterness, and that simple prayer reminded him of his family back in Connecticut, and the times he would tease his sister and anger his father and mother while grace was being said at the breakfast table. Now, alone in the world and sick, he was dependent on the kindness of these strangers. They were more than just acquaintances, they were friends, and the thought filled them both with joy. "Mescal, go help the stranger," August Justice instructed, and the young girl knelt beside the weakened man, offering him food and drink. His trembling hands were unable to grasp the cup, so she held it to his lips and he drank. The hot coffee revived him, and he ate heartily before readily sharing his story when the Mormon asked for it. "My name is Langford, I'm 24, and my parents have passed away," he began. "I came out west because the doctors said I couldn't survive in the east. At first I was doing better, but my money ran out and I had to find work. I wandered from place to place and ended up sick in Salt Lake City. The people there were kind to me, and someone got me a job with a big cattle company. They sent me to Marysvale, down south over the harsh plains. It was freezing, and by the time I got to Lund, I was already ill. Before I even knew what my job was, the men there accused me of being a spy. One guy named Cisco threatened me, and an innkeeper snuck me out the back, gave me some bread and water, and pointed me to a road that led to Bain, 16 miles away. He said if I made it, someone might give me a lift north. I walked all night and all the next day. Eventually I collapsed here where you found me." "You took the wrong road, friend," Justice pointed out. "This is the path to White Sage. It's a trail of sand and stones that doesn't leave any tracks, which is lucky for you. Beale wasn't in Lund while you were there, or else you wouldn't be here. He hasn't seen you, and he can't be certain of your trail. Maybe he rode to Bain, but we might be able to find a way." One of Justice's sons whistled low, causing him to rise slowly and peer into the darkness, listening intently. "Get up," he said, offering a hand to Langford. "You're pretty shaky, huh? Can you walk? Let me help you. Mescal, come here." The slender girl obeyed, moving silently like a shadow. "Take his arm." Together they led Langford to a pile of rocks on the outer edge of the campfire's light. "It wouldn't be wise to hide," Justice whispered urgently. "That could be fatal. You're in view of the campfire, but barely visible. The outlaws will arrive soon, and if any of them come close, you and Mescal need to act like sweethearts, got it? They won't pay any attention to Mormon lovebirds. Now be brave. Mescal, it could save his life." Justice headed back to the fire, his shadow looming large against the white canopy of a covered wagon. The wind played with the flames, causing them to roar, crackle, and sputter, casting light on the still forms before plunging them into eerie darkness. Langford shuddered, whether from the cold or growing fear it was hard to say. To the west lay the desert, a vast black void. Ahead the mountain wall rose up, its jagged peaks reaching for the stars. To the right was the ridge, its rocks and stunted cedars standing out in strange relief. Suddenly Langford saw a dark shape and watched as it moved and rose up from behind the ridge's summit, becoming a bold black figure against the clear sky. He could see it clearly, realizing it was close, and breathed hard as the wind swept mane and tail. The lean, wild shape and single plume became the unmistakable outline of an Indian mustang and rider. "Look," he whispered to Mescal. "See the mounted Indian on the ridge? There he is. No, wait, he's gone. Oh, there he is again. But there's another one. Look, there are more." Langford gasped, his eyes widening in fear as he stared at a line of mounted Indians moving in single file over the ridge before disappearing into the darkness. The sound of gravel rattling and unshod hooves on stone confirmed their presence. "Navajos," Mescal said calmly. Navajos, Langford repeated, his voice trembling. I heard of them in Lund. They call them desert hawks and say they're worse than Paiutes. Shouldn't we warn the men? Aren't you afraid? No, Mescal replied confidently, pointing to the sturdy figure standing by the firelight. But they're hostile, Langford protested. Not to him, Mescal replied, her gaze fixed on Father Justice. Ah, I remember. Severino spoke of friendly Navajos. They must be close by. What does it mean? I'm not sure, Mescal admitted. I think they're out there in the cedars, waiting. Waiting for what? Langford demanded. Perhaps for a signal, Mescal suggested. Then they were expected? I don't know, I only guess. We used to ride often to White Sage and Lund. Now we go seldom, and when we do there seem to be Navajos near the camp at night and riding the ridges by day. I believe Father Justice knows. Your father's risking much for me. He's good. I wish I could show my gratitude. I call him Father Justice, but he is not my father, Mescal explained. A niece or granddaughter, then? I'm no relation. Father Justice raised me in his family. My mother was a Navajo, my father a Spaniard. Why, Langford exclaimed. When you came out of the wagon, I took you for an Indian girl. But the moment you spoke, you talked so well no one would dream. Mormons are well educated and teach the children they raise, Mescal interrupted, sensing Langford's embarrassment. He wanted to ask if she were a Mormon by religion, but the question seemed curious and unnecessary. His interest was piqued as he realized he found pleasure in her unique and unfamiliar voice, unlike any woman he had heard before. He studied her closely, only able to steal a quick glance at her sharp, chiseled profile before she turned her dark, startled eyes towards him. Those eyes looked straight through him, as if they were looking into his very soul. Slowly she held up a hand and leaned towards the wind, whispering for him to listen. Langford strained to hear over the sound of coyotes barking and the wind rustling through the sagebrush. He watched as the men around the campfire rose to face the north, and the women quickly climbed into the wagon, shutting the canvas flaps tight. He braced himself for the arrival of the outlaws, his heart pounding like a drum inside his chest. Finally, a strong gust of wind brought the sound of pounding hooves, and Langford felt a sense of relief wash over him. Whatever was going to happen, it would be decided soon. The sound grew louder and louder until a group of horsemen burst into the circle of light, their horses skidding to a halt. August Justice tossed a bundle of wood onto the fire, illuminating the area with a bright red glow. "Who goes there?" he called out. "Friends, Mormons, friends," came the response. "Come down and join us by the fire." 3 horsemen rode forward while the rest stayed in the shadows. Langford recognized the leader of the group, Beale, even though they had never met before. He couldn't help but notice the outlaw's striking good looks and commanding presence. Mescal whispered Beale's name, confirming Langford's fear. He was acutely aware of the danger they were in, and he braced himself for whatever was to come next. Memories of encountering dangerous individuals flooded his mind as he observed the clean-cut appearance, youthful physique, and nonchalant demeanor of Beale. Despite the friendly way he removed his gloves and shook off sand, Beale's piercing gaze hinted at something more sinister. "Are you the Mormon Justice?" he asked. "I go by August Justice," came the reply. "Looks like you're camping without water. Your horses must be tired from the sandy trail." "Where are the rest of your companions?" Beale inquired. "Severino and his men were in a hurry to reach White Sage tonight. They were traveling light, whereas I have heavy wagons," August explained. "You wouldn't lie to me, would you, Justice?" Beale probed. "I have never told a lie," August replied. "Have you heard of a young man that was in Lund? We called him the pale chap with a lung condition," Beale asked. "I heard he was mistaken for a spy in Lund and fled towards Bain," August answered. "Have you seen anything of him this side of Lund?" Beale inquired further. "No," August responded. "Have you seen any Navajos?" August nodded. Beale appeared to be on the verge of discussing the Navajos, but instead he put on his gloves slowly. "Justice, I'll have to come visit you someday. I've never been over that range. I heard you have fine water, fine cattle. And say I saw that little Navajo girl you have, I wouldn't mind seeing her again," Beale remarked. August stoked the fire, replying, "Yes, it's a fine range. There's fine water, cattle, and browse. I also have a fine graveyard with 30 graves, and not a single one belongs to a woman. The canyon country is a fine place for graves. You don't have to dig. There's one grave the Indians never named, and it's 3,000 feet deep. That must be in hell, Beale chuckled, paying no attention to the underlying message. He studied August's 4 sons, the wagons and horses, before his gaze landed on Langford and Mescal. He swung in his saddle as if he were about to dismount. "I sure want to look around," he said. Get down, replied the Mormon. The deep voice was unwelcoming and had an odd ring to it. It would have struck a less suspicious man than Beale. The outlaw wrung his leg back over the pommel, sagged in the saddle, and appeared to be pondering the question. He was uncertain of his ground, but his indecision was brief. "Two-Spot, you look them over," he ordered. The third horseman dismounted and went toward the wagons. Langford watched the scene and became aware that his fear had intensified with the recognition of Two-Spot as Cisco, the outlaw whom he would not soon forget. In his excitement he moved against Mescal and felt her trembling violently. "Are you afraid?" he whispered. "Yes, of Beale." The outlaw rummaged in one of the wagons, pulled aside the canvas flaps of the other, laughed harshly, and then, with clinking spurs, tramped through the camp, kicking the beds, overturning a pile of saddles, and making disorder generally until he spied the couple sitting on the stone in the shadow. As the outlaw lurched that way, Langford, with a start of recollection, took Mescal in his arms and leaned his head against hers. He felt one of her hands lightly brush his shoulder and rest there, trembling. Shuffling footsteps scraped the sand, sounded nearer and nearer, slowed and paused. "Sparkin, dead to the world, ham, haw-haw!" The coarse laugh gave way to moving footsteps. The rattling clink of stirrup and spur mingled with the restless stamp of a horse. Cisco had mounted. Beale's voice drawled out, "Goodbye, Justice, I sure will see you all some day." The heavy thuds of many hooves evened into a roar that diminished as it rushed away. In unutterable relief, Langford realized his deliverance. He tried to rise, but the power of movement had gone from him. He was fainting, yet his sensations were singularly acute. Mescal's hand fell from his shoulder. Her cheek, once cold, now grew warm against his skin. Her entire body trembled, sending waves of confusion through him. Gratitude and hope surged within him as something sweet and beautiful. The touch of this desert girl flooded his veins. His heart swelled with exquisite agony, and then he was spinning in darkness, losing all sense of consciousness. Chapter 2. Langford couldn't remember anything from the previous night, and the morning was a blur. As he slowly regained consciousness, he found himself lying on a couch on the porch of a cottage that was covered in vines. He saw August Justice open the garden gate to allow Jacob Severino in. They greeted each other cordially, with no hint of disdain from August and no fear from Jacob, who had previously shown fear in the desert. Jacob showed respect towards August, who he regarded as his superior. "Elder, I heard you were safe in," Jacob said fervently. "We feared the worst. I was distressed until I got the news of your arrival. How's the young man?" "He's very ill, but while there's life, there's hope," August replied. "Will the bishop administer to him?" Jacob asked. "Gladly, if the young man is willing. Come, let's go in," August replied. "Wait, August," said Jacob. "Did you know your son Snap was in the village?" "My son here," August exclaimed, betraying anxiety. "I left him at home with work. He shouldn't have come, is he?" "He's drinking and in an ugly mood. It seems he traded horses with Jeff Larson and got the worst of the deal. There's pretty sure to be a fight," Jacob replied. "He always hated Larson," August said. "Small wonder. Larson is mean. He's as bad as we've got, and that's saying a lot. Snap has done worse things than fight with Larson. He's doing a worse thing now, August. He's too friendly with Beale," Jacob said. "I've heard it before, but Jacob, what can I do?" August asked. "Do? God knows. What can any of us do?" Jacob replied. "Things have changed, August. Beale is now in White Sage, free to roam and welcomed in many homes. Unfortunately, some of our neighbors, perhaps even men we trust, are secretly members of Beale's rustler band." "You're right, Severino. There are Mormons who are cattle thieves. It's a shame, but I confess it. They ride with Beale under the cover of night, meeting him in easy tolerance. He's come here to corrupt our young men. It's a terrible situation." "August, some of our young men need no one to corrupt them. Beale had an easy time winning them over. He came here with a few outlaws and now has a strong band. We have to face it. We have no law, but he can be killed. Someone must kill him. Yet as bad as Beale is, he doesn't threaten our way of life as Holderness does. Beale steals a few cattle and kills a man here and there. Holderness, on the other hand, takes our springs. He steals the blood of our life water, God's gift to the desert. Someone must kill Holderness, too. Jacob, this desire to kill is a dangerous thing. Come in and pray with the bishop. No, Elder, it's not prayer I need, replied Severino stubbornly. I'm still a good Mormon. What I want is my lost stock and my fields to be green again. August Justice had no answer for his friend. Then an old man with snow-white hair and beard appeared on the porch. Bishop, Brother Jacob is struggling again, said Justice as Severino bared his head. Jacob, my son, tell me what's troubling you, rejoined the bishop. I have black doubts and see no light, said Severino despondently. I'm part of the younger generation of Mormons, and faith is harder for me. I see signs you can't see. I've had trials that are hard to bear. I was once rich in cattle, sheep, and water. These non-Mormons, the rancher Holderness and the outlaw Beale, have stolen my cattle, killed my sheep, and diverted my water from my fields. I'm not happy with the current situation. We're not living in the old days anymore. Our young men are leaving, and the few who return have ideas that go against our Mormon beliefs. Our children are growing up surrounded by non-Mormons, and some are even marrying them, which is a threat to our way of life. Jacob, you need to rid yourself of these negative thoughts and return to our faith. The millennium will come, and Christ will reign on earth once again. The 10 tribes of Israel will be restored, and the Book of Mormon is the Word of God. Our creed will survive. We may suffer and die here, but our spirits will continue on, and the city of Zion will be built over our graves, said Severino, trying to give Jacob hope. August Justice leaned over Langford and said, I would like the bishop to administer to you. Langford asked, What's that? Justice explained, It's a Mormon custom, the laying on of hands. We know it's effective in times of trouble and illness. A bishop of the Mormon Church has the gift of tongues, prophecy, revelation, and healing. Let him administer to you. It doesn't require any obligation. Think of it as a prayer. Langford agreed, and Justice spoke quietly to someone outside the door. The voices stopped, and then a group of women, young men, girls, and children entered the room. A white-haired old woman approached with a silver bowl, which she held for the bishop as he stood beside Langford's bed. The bishop placed his hands into the bowl, anointing them with fragrant oil. He then placed his hands on Langford's head and offered a brief and simple prayer that was filled with emotion. As the ceremony came to an end, the onlookers approached Langford with pleasant words and smiles. Bashful yet sympathetic, the children walked by his couch while the women murmured and the young men grasped his hand. Mescal, with a shy smile and downcast eyes, flitted by without saying a word. Your fever is gone, said August Justice, placing his hand on Langford's cheek. It comes and goes suddenly, replied Langford. I feel better now, only I'm oppressed. I can't breathe freely. I want air, and I'm hungry. Mother Mary, the lad's hungry. Judith, Esther, where are your wits? Help your mother. Mescal, wait on him, see to his comfort, said August Justice. Mescal brought a little table and a pillow, while the other girls soon followed with food and drink. They hovered around Langford, absorbed in caring for him. They said I fell among thieves, mused Langford when he was once more alone. I've fallen among saints as well. He knew that he could never repay August Justice. If only I might live, he exclaimed. The cottage garden was a peaceful haven for Langford. The green sward was a balm to his eyes, and the flowers, though familiar in hue, were new to him. The fruit trees' white and pink blossoms blended together, and the laughter of children filled the air. Strange birds darted among the trees, singing the old delicious monotone of the joy of living and love of spring. A green-bowered irrigation ditch led by the porch, and unseen water flowed gently with gurgle and tinkle, creating a peaceful melody. Innumerable bees murmured amid the blossoms. Langford eventually fell asleep, but upon returning to consciousness he caught a glimpse of golden sunlight shafts peeking through the trees. He felt himself being carried into the house to be laid upon a bed. Someone gently unbuttoned his shirt at the neck, removed his shoes, and covered him with a blanket. As he slowly opened his eyes, Langford found himself alone in the quiet house. A sense of relaxation and peace washed over him, lulling him back to sleep. Suddenly he was awake again, the bright sun streaming through the window and a light breeze rustling the curtains. A nagging feeling in his chest warned him of an impending coughing fit, so he quickly dressed and stepped outside into the fresh air. The cough racked his body before finally subsiding. August Justice greeted him with a cheerful, "Good morning," and remarked on Langford's impressive 16 hours of sleep. Langford couldn't help but agree, feeling better than he had in days. Justice mentioned a busy day ahead, including shoeing horses and packing supplies for a trip home. Langford wondered if he would be joining him, and the idea filled him with hope. Over breakfast, Langford pondered over Justice's words, wondering if the kind Mormon intended to take him to his desert home. Despite feeling like a beggar with no strength left to work, he hoped Justice would offer him a place to stay. Justice was waiting for him on the porch after breakfast and led him down the path towards the gate. "I want you to come home with me," Justice said. Langford hesitated, feeling like he didn't deserve such kindness. "I'll go, but I shouldn't," he said. Justice smiled reassuringly. "I don't have the gift of revelation, but I have a feeling you won't die of this illness. If you can get well anywhere, it'll be at my Navajo oasis, the Garden of Eshtah." Langford agreed to go, feeling grateful for Justice's generosity and hopeful for his future. "What can I do for you?" asked Justice. "Well, no man can ever tell what he may do for another. The time may come," replied Langford. "Is it settled?" asked Justice, offering his huge hand. "It's settled," Langford replied, faltering as he shook Justice's hand. The Mormon's grip was strong and simple, and Langford felt his frame brace up. He swallowed his thanks and said, "No one ever called me Matt. I don't know the name. Call me Jack." "Very well, Jack, and now let's see. You'll need some things from the store. Can you come with me? It's not far." "Surely. And now what I need most is a razor to scrape the alkali and stubble off my face." They walked down the wide street, bordered by cottages peeping out of green and white orchards. In the distance they could see the Pink Cliffs. A green square enclosed a gray church, a schoolhouse, and public hall. Farther down the street were several weatherboarded, whitewashed stores. As they approached the largest store, they saw two dusty men riding along, each on a side of the wildest, most vicious little horse Langford had ever seen. It reared and bucked and kicked, trying to escape from two lassos. In front of the store were a number of mustangs, all standing free, with bridles thrown over their heads and trailing on the ground. The loungers leaning against the railing and about the doors were lank brown men very like Justice's sons. Some wore sheepskin chaps, some blue overalls. All wore boots and spurs, wide soft hats, and in their belts far to the back hung large Colt's revolvers. "We'll buy what you need just as if you expected to ride the ranges for me tomorrow," said Justice. "The first thing we ask a new man is, can he ride? Next, can he shoot?" "I could ride before I got so weak," replied Langford. "I ain't never handled no revolver, but I sure can shoot a rifle," I said to the man who was showing me the guns. I had only ever shot targets before, but it came natural to me to hit them. "Good," he said. "We'll show you some targets like lions, bears, deer, cats, and wolves. My friend Abe has a fine .44 Winchester that he's been trying to sell. It's got a long barrel and weighs 8 pounds. Our desert riders like light carbines that are easy on the saddle, 'cause most of the Mustangs can't carry much weight. This rifle has a great range. I've shot it myself, and it's just the gun for you to use on wolves and coyotes. You'll need a Colt and a saddle, too." As we climbed the steps to the store, he said, "By the way, here's the kind of money we use in this country." He handed me a slip of blue paper, a written check for a sum of money, signed but without any register of bank or name of firm. "We don't use real money," he added. "There's hardly any coin or currency in southern Utah. Most of the Gentiles who've come in lately have money, and some of us Mormons have a bag or two of gold, but hardly any of it gets into circulation. We use these checks, which can go from man to man for up to 6 months. The cashing of a check can mean sheep, cattle, horses, grain, merchandise, or labor. Every man gets his real money's value without paying out an actual cent." "That's a system that at least means honest men," I said, surprised. We entered the store and walked through narrow aisles between boxes and barrels, stacks of canned vegetables, piles of harness and dry goods. We came to an open space where several men were leaning on a counter. "Hello, Abe," said the man who was showing me the guns. "Seen anything of Snap?" "Hello, August," said Abe. "Yes, Snap's inside, so's Holderness. He says he rode in off the range on purpose to see you." Abe pointed to an open doorway from which loud voices could be heard. As Langford peered into the smoky room, he could make out a group of men gathered around a rough bar. The air was thick with the scent of rum, and it was difficult to see through the haze. Suddenly Abe called out to someone named Snap, letting him know that his father was looking for him. In addition, he introduced Langford to a man named August Justice. Justice slowly stumbled into the store, his face stern and hawk-like. Despite his relatively short stature, he appeared tall and imposing. He wore a blue flannel shirt and overalls, and 2 Colt's revolvers were strapped to his lean hips. Justice's boots were equipped with long, cruel spurs. After exchanging pleasantries with his father, Justice was informed that they would be riding out the next day and that he needed his son's help. Justice agreed to lend a hand, but only after he retrieved his pinto from a man named Larson. Apparently, Larson had swindled him out of his horse, and Justice was intent on finding him. Langford noticed that Justice's teeth made a peculiar snapping sound when he spoke, which was fitting given his name. Justice's eyes were cold and fiery, and he seemed to be a man who had faced many obstacles in his life. Langford quickly realized that Justice's son Snap was his firstborn and best-loved child. However, he also seemed to be a thorn in his father's side. As Snap approached, he asked his father if Langford was the spy he had found on the trail. Snap's pale eyes gleamed with a fierce intensity, and Langford couldn't help but feel uneasy in his presence. "This is Matt Langford, the young man I found. But he ain't no spy," said Justice, defending Langford against the accusations of being a spy for Beale. "No one's going to believe that. He's been marked by Beale as a counter of unbranded stock. Don't take him home like you've taken all those other sick and hunted men before. It's pointless. You ain't made a Mormon out of any of them yet. Unless you want another grave for your cemetery, don't take him," warned Justice with a sinister laugh. Langford was taken aback by the hostility towards him. Justice made his way to the door and left, with his eyes fixed on Langford the whole time. The others in the store soon followed, leaving Langford with August and the storekeeper. August introduced Langford to the storekeeper and explained their needs. They selected the items they needed for a range rider, but Justice ended up choosing most of the items, including a beautiful rifle that was too long and heavy for riders. The storekeeper offered to sell it at half price along with 2,000 cartridges, and Justice quickly accepted the offer. As they were making their purchase, Holderness, a tall, blond-bearded man, entered the store. Langford was intrigued by the mention of his name and watched as he greeted Justice and inquired about the young man he had picked up. Justice confirmed that Langford was the one, and Holderness turned his attention to Langford. "Hey there, Jack Langford," said August Justice as he approached. "I'm Holderness, you might remember my name. You were sent to Lund to check out my ranges, but I didn't get a chance to meet you then." Langford shook Holderness's hand, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this man. His piercing amber eyes seemed to be searching for something, and Langford couldn't quite put his finger on it. "Justice, can you tell me about Langford?" Holderness asked, turning to August. "He was sent here to spy on the Mormons and their cattle rustling, but I told them it wasn't a good idea. These Mormons won't stand for someone keeping track of their stock. But if Langford wants to work, I'll take him to the ranch." Langford spoke up. "Thanks, but no thanks. I'm going with Justice." Holderness accepted this with a nod, but Langford could tell he was still being scrutinized. He walked to the counter to sort his purchases, but he couldn't help but overhear their conversation. "Justice, is Langford's health okay?" Holderness asked. "He's got a bad lung. He's not in good shape, but I'm taking him with me anyway." Holderness warned Justice that Langford had the reputation of being Beale's spy, and it wasn't safe for him to stay in the area, but Justice was determined to take Langford with him. "Even your own crew ain't fond of it, and it spells trouble for you," said Holderness with a sneer. "We've already settled it," retorted Justice, his voice cold. "I've tried to be friendly with you, but you don't seem to want that. What do you want to talk about?" "I want to know where we stand on a few things, starting with Mescal," replied Holderness. "I've already told you I won't let you have her," Justice replied firmly. "But I never said I'd marry her. Now I want her, and I will marry her," Holderness demanded. Justice's answer was quick and to the point. "No." "Why not?" Holderness asked. "I know there's not enough money in Utah to buy a girl away from a Mormon," Justice replied. Holderness moved on to a different topic. About the offer for the water rights, how do we stand? I'll give you $10,000 for the rights to Seeping Springs and Silver Cup. 10,000! Justice exclaimed. Holderness, I wouldn't take 100,000. You might as well ask to buy my home, my stock, my range, 20 years of toil for $10,000. You refuse? All right, then. I think I've made you a fair proposition, said Holderness in a smooth voice. The land is owned by the government, and although your ranges are across the Arizona line, they really figure as Utah land. My company's spending big money, and the government won't let you have a monopoly. No one man can control the water supply of 100 miles of range. Times are changing. You want to see that? You ought to protect yourself before it's too late. Holderness, this is a desert. Only Mormons could have made it habitable. The government barely knows it exists. It'll be 50 years before anyone can come in here to take our water, Justice argued. Why can't he? The water doesn't belong to anyone. Why can't he? Holderness questioned. Because of the unwritten law of the desert, replied Justice firmly. No Mormon would deny you or your horse a drink or even a reasonable supply for your livestock. But you can't just come in here and take our water for your own use to replace us and leave our livestock thirsty. Even an Indian understands the laws of the desert. Bah, I'm not a Mormon or an Indian, I'm a cattleman. It's just business for me. Once again I offer you a deal, replied the cattleman. Justice didn't bother to respond. The two men stared at each other for a moment, their eyes flashing. Then Holderness turned abruptly, bumping into Langford. Get out of my way, he snapped at the rancher in a fit of irritation. He swung his arm, and his hand sent Langford crashing into the counter. Jack, said Justice, his voice shaking with anger, Holderness has shown his true colors today. I always knew it, yet I gave him the benefit of the doubt. For him to hit you, I'm not a prophet, but I can see clearly that we should leave. On the way back to the bishop's cottage, Justice didn't say a word. The transformation that had started with his drunken son's arrival had reached its climax of gloomy silence after the altercation with Holderness. Justice went straight to the bishop, and soon the old minister's trembling voice was raised in prayer. Langford slumped into a chair on the porch and eventually dozed off, only to be jolted awake. Justice's sons, along with Jacob Severino and several other men, were in the yard. Justice himself was gently urging the women into the house. Once they were all inside, he closed the door and turned to Severino. Was it a fair fight? Yes, it was a fair fight. They met outside of Abe's. I saw the whole thing. Neither was caught off guard. They stood there for a moment staring at each other. Then they drew their guns, but Snap was faster. Larson's gun went off as he fell. That trick you taught Snap saved his life once again. Larson was known to be quick on the draw. Where's Snap now? He asked. He's gone after his pinto. He was sober and said he'd pack at once. Larson's friends are not to be trusted. Snap told me to tell you to hurry out of the village with young Langford if you want to take him at all. Beale has ridden in and he swears you won't take Langford away, replied the informant. We're all packed and ready to hitch up, Justice replied. We could start at once, but until dark I'd rather take chances here than out on the trail. Snap said Beale would ride right into the bishops after Langford, added the informant. No, he wouldn't dare, Justice replied. Father, Dave Justice spoke sharply from where he stood high on a grassy bank. Here's Beale now, riding up with Culver and some man I don't know. They're coming in. Beale's jumped the fence. Look out. A clatter of hoofs and the rattling of gravel preceded the appearance of a black horse in the garden path. Its rider bent low to dodge the vines of the arbor and reined in before the porch to slip out of the saddle with the agility of an Indian. It was Beale, dark, smiling, and nonchalant. What do you seek in the house of a bishop? Challenged August Justice, planting his broad bulk square before Langford. Beale's a spy. What do you seek in the house of a bishop? Repeated Justice. I sure want to see the young feller you lied to me about, returned Beale, his smile slowly fading. No speech could be a lie to an outlaw. I want him, you Mormon preacher, Beale said. You can't have him, Justice replied. I'll sure get him. In one great stride, Justice confronted and towered over Beale. The rustler's gaze shifted warily from Justice to the quiet Mormons and back again. Then his right hand quivered and shot downward. Justice's act was even quicker. A Colt gleamed and whirled to the grass, and the outlaw cried out as his arm cracked in the Mormon's grasp. As Beale's companions approached, Dave Justice jumped off the bank in front of them. He stood alert and silent, with his hand on his hip. August Justice grabbed Beale and held him against the porch post with his strong arm. "You're a worthless son of a gun," he shouted, shaking his head. "Do you really think we're scared of you and your gun tricks? Look at this." He let go of Beale and stepped back, holding out his hand. In the blink of an eye, a Colt revolver appeared in his palm. He quickly holstered it. "Learn from this and never draw on me again." He made a fist and held it up to Beale's face. "One hit from me could crack your skull like an eggshell. Why don't I hit you? Because, you mindless dog, there's a higher law than man's law, God's law. Thou shalt not kill. Do you understand that? Leave me and my family alone from this day forward. Now get out of here." Dave pushed Beale down the path towards his companions. "Hurry up and leave. I'm not as forgiving as my dad when it comes to God." Chapter 3. After Beale and his crew left, Justice decided to hit the road at nightfall. Jacob Severino and the bishop's sons tried to convince him to stay in White Sage, saying it would be safer to face any trouble in the village. But Justice was stubborn, and Severino thought he was being unreasonable unless he had a good reason to leave at night. As the sun set, Justice had his teams ready and the women safely tucked away in the covered wagons. Langford was riding in an open wagon, which Justice had filled with grain. As darkness fell, a man jumped over the cottage fence. "Dave, where are the boys?" Justice asked. "Shh, they're on their way," Dave replied in a hushed tone. "Beale's gone crazy. I reckon he broke his arm because he's swearing he'll murder us all. But don't worry, Cisco and the rest of the gang won't be back until later. We still have time to get to the Coconina Trail if we hurry," reported one of the men. "Any word on Snap?" asked another. "He rode out before sundown," replied a third man. As they spoke, 3 more figures emerged from the darkness. "All right, boys, let's get going." "Dave, you lead," commanded one of the men. Dave and George Justice mounted their Mustangs and rode through the gate, followed by 2 wagons. August Justice clucked to his team and took his place on the 3rd wagon. Langford closed the gate and climbed onto the back of the wagon. The group advanced cautiously, the only sound being the swishing of weeds and grasses brushing against the wheels. To the left was a bare field, while to the right low roofs and chimneys peeked out from the trees. Here and there lights twinkled. However, no one hailed them, and not a single dog barked. As they turned onto a road, the sound of iron hoofs and wheels cracking and crunching stones filled the air. Langford thought he saw something in the deep shade of a line of poplar trees. He peered closer and made out a motionless horse and rider, a shade blacker than the darkness. They vanished the next instant, and the rapid clatter of hoofs down the road confirmed Langford's suspicions. "Get up," growled Justice to his horses. "Jack, did you see that fellow?" "Yes, what was he doing there?" replied Jack. "Watching the road. He's one of Beale's scouts." One of Justice's sons came trotting back. "I think that was Larson's pal. He was waiting for Snap." "I thought he was a scout for Beale," said August. "Maybe he's both." "Likely enough. Hurry along and keep the gray team going lively," said one of the men. "They've had a week's rest," Langford remarked as he watched the lights of the village disappear one by one like jack-o'-lanterns. The horses kept a steady, even trot into the vast, windy expanse of the desert night. Fleecy clouds veiled the stars, but a faint glow shone through. Langford shivered as a chill crept over him. As he crawled under the blankets that Justice had spread for him, his hand brushed against a cold, polished metal surface. It was his rifle, placed there by Justice without a word. Langford found a cartridge loaded in the weapon and realized that, without saying a word, Justice had given him a man's part to play. The full meaning of this lifted Langford out of his self-doubt, and he felt like a man once more. Eventually, Langford succumbed to the warmth of his blankets and fell asleep. Hours later, he awoke and for a moment couldn't remember where he was. The cold wind whipping across his face, the woolly feel and smell of the blankets, and the steady trot of horses reminded him of their night ride. He wondered how far they had gone, how the drivers knew the way, and whether the outlaws were following them. When Justice stopped the team and walked back a few yards to listen, Langford was certain that Beale was on their trail. He listened as well, but all he could hear were the sounds of the horses and their harnesses. Justice settled back into his seat as the team picked up the pace, no longer content with a trot. Langford, feeling the motion of the wagon, drifted off into a deep slumber. He was only awakened by the grinding of the wheels as they came to a stop. He quickly sat up and turned his ear to the back trail, listening for any sign of danger. The night had given way to a gray dawn, and Langford watched as the sun slowly rose, painting the horizon a beautiful rose red. The view was stunning, with the rolling hills and valleys stretching out for miles. Justice greeted Langford with a smile, pleased to see that he had gotten some rest. "No sign of Beale yet," he said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "If we can get over the divide, we'll be safe. That's Coconina over there. It's a plateau that runs far to the east and rises 9,000 feet. It forms 100 miles of the north rim of the Grand Canyon. We're across the Arizona line now." Langford looked out at the ridge that rose to the east, but he couldn't quite grasp the scale of it all. "Don't try to guess the distance or size just yet," Justice warned him. "You'll have to relearn everything once you get used to the light and air out here. That looks like a black spot over there under the red wall. Do you see it?" Langford strained his eyes and finally saw the spot. "Good," Justice said. "That's Holderness's ranch. It's 30 miles from here. 9 Mile Valley used to belong to Jacob Severino, but Holderness stole it, and now he's ranging over the divide." As the sun continued to rise, Langford noticed the increased height and abundance of the sagebrush. It was darker in color and seemed to stretch on for miles. The beauty of the desert was breathtaking, and Langford couldn't wait to explore more of this new land. The journey up the ascent was a grueling one. Langford found himself constantly looking up at the wagons as they slowly made their way up the rocky terrain. Justice informed him that they had reached the halfway point when they passed the first cedar tree, which was stunted in growth and dead at the top. As they continued up the ascent, Langford grew tired and eventually closed his eyes, the sound of the wheels crunching on the stones lulling him into a state of lethargy. However, he was suddenly awakened by an unusual noise. The wagon had come to a standstill, and Justice was pointing down at the valley below. Snap Justice, mounted on a cream-colored Pinto, had located a group of wild mustangs that no one else had been able to spot. Langford strained his eyes, but was unable to see anything. The ascent continued at a leisurely pace, with more frequent rests. Eventually they reached the summit and entered a level forest of cedars. Another hour passed, and they began to descend gradually. Justice announced that they had reached the tanks, and Langford saw that they had caught up with the other wagons. George Justice led his team down a rocky slope to a pool of yellow water while the other boys unharnessed and unsaddled. "It's about 3, Justice said, looking at the sun. "We're in good time. Jack, get out and stretch yourself. We camp here. The Coconina Trail is where the Navajos go after deer." The spot was not beautiful, with its little rock-strewn clearing where the white hard trail forked with the road. The yellow water with its green scum made Langford feel queasy. The horses drank loudly while Justice and his sons drank from it. The women filled a pail and divvied it up into basins to wash their faces and hands with obvious pleasure. Dave Justice whistled as he skillfully wielded an axe on a cedar. It became clear to Langford that the tension of the past night and morning had relaxed. Whether it was due to the distance from White Sage or the arrival at the water hole, he could not say. But the certainty was evident in August's cheerful talk to the horses as he slipped bags of grain over their noses, and in the subdued laughter of the women. Langford silently thanked that these good Mormons had seemingly escaped from the dangers incurred for his sake. He sat with his back to a cedar and watched the fires kindle, the skillful handling of biscuit dough in a basin, and the pots start to steam. The generous meal was spread on a canvas cloth, around which men and women sat cross-legged Indian style. Langford found it difficult to adapt his long legs to the posture, and he wondered how these men, whose legs were longer than his, could sit so comfortably. It was the highlight of a cheerful dinner after hours of anxiety and abstinence to have Snap Justice speak civilly to him, and to see him bow his head meekly as his father asked the blessing. Snap devoured his meal as if he had completely forgotten about his recent act of killing a man. The others seemed to have forgotten it too, judging by the way they conversed with him. All of them had finished eating, except for Snap and Dave Justice, when one of the mustangs let out a loud neigh. Langford would not have noticed it if he hadn't seen the looks exchanged among the men. A few minutes later, a group of mounted Indians emerged from the cedar forest and entered the glade. The once dreary glade transformed into a vibrant and lively place. The Navajos rode on wiry, wild-looking mustangs and led ponies and burros carrying packs, mostly made up of deer hides. Each Indian dismounted, unstrapped the blanket that had served as their saddle, and headed for the waterhole, giving their mustangs a slap. The hides and packs were then removed from the pack train, and soon the pool became a frenzied splash fest. Every cedar tree circling the glade and every branch served as a peg for deer meat. Some of it was in the haunch, while the rest was in dark, dried strips. The Indians laid their weapons aside. Every sagebush and low stone held a blanket. A few of these blankets were of solid color, whereas most of them had bars of white, gray, and red, with the last color being the most prominent. The mustangs and burros grazed among the cedars, biting at the sage and the scattered tufts of spare grass. A group of fires, surrounded by a circle of lean, half-naked, bronze-skinned Indians cooking and eating, completed a picture which fulfilled Langford's boyish dreams. It was a stark contrast to the memories of his campsite on the Connecticut shore, where he and his boyfriends told tales in the warmth of the fire and the sound of waves crashing on the beach. The sun slowly descended in the west, casting rays of light through the gnarled branches of the cedars, turning the green into gold. As the sun began to set, the women of the Mormon group broke out into a soft song that had a prayer-like quality to it. The men stood in silent harmony, with the exception of Dave Justice, who was the only one smoking a pipe. He took a moment to remove it as a sign of respect to the dying day. Once the ceremony was finished, one of the boys added more wood to the fire. Snap pulled a Jew's harp out of his pocket and began to play some discordant notes, causing George to kick at him in disgust. Snap eventually left the circle and went to play with his instrument in the cedars, where he could be as egotistical as he pleased. August Justice then spoke up, informing the group that their Navajo friends, Scarbreast and Eshta, would be coming to visit them. He advised them not to pay too much attention to the chiefs at first, as they had great dignity and would likely sit for a few moments before acknowledging anyone. Scarbreast was a war chief, while Eshta was the wise old chief of all the Navajos on the Painted Desert. August also mentioned that Eshta was Mescal's grandfather, and promised to share the story with them at a later time. Langford made an effort to appear unaware when the two tall Navajos entered the circle of Mormons. He kept his eyes fixed on the white heart of the campfire and waited. For several minutes no one spoke or moved. The Indians stood for a while before finally taking a seat. August then greeted them in Navajo, which was the signal for Langford to start paying attention. There was another period of silence before the Navajos began to speak. Langford could only see their black heads and the shoulders of their blankets. At length, Justice called Langford over and introduced him to the Navajos. Eshta, a dignified and sharp-eyed warrior despite his age, greeted Langford with a simple, "How do?" The other Navajo used a guttural word to greet him. The man before them looked like he had seen his fair share of battles. His face was weathered and hard like a mask made of bronze, and his expression held a fierce, untamed quality that spoke of the desert. Langford bowed respectfully to the man, feeling the heat of his intense gaze as he did so. The man, whose name was Scarface, seemed doubtful but not unfriendly. "Shake," said another man, Eshta, holding out his hand. Scarface followed suit, extending his bare arm adorned with silver bracelets. Justice, who had brought Langford here to meet with these Navajo chieftains, was pleased to see this sign of friendship. He hoped to gain their sympathies for the young man's cause. Justice began speaking, gesturing emphatically as he did so. He spoke in a mix of English and Navajo, using simple words like weak and bad as he touched different parts of Langford's body. Scarface watched him intently while Eshta struggled to find the right words in English. Eventually he switched back to Navajo, saying something that made the other Navajo warriors burst into laughter. Langford listened to the conversation for a while, but soon grew tired. He retreated to a nearby cedar tree where he had left his blankets earlier. The needles made for a comfortable bed, and he drifted off to sleep, listening to the crackle of the cedar wood burning in the fire. The low voices of the Navajos barely reached Langford's ears, murmuring toas and tas in a characteristic pattern. The sound brought to mind something pleasant he had heard before. Then he remembered Mescal's sweet voice and the connection between her and the Navajo chief. Langford searched for her in the circle of light, feeling drawn to her like the enchantment of the twilight hour. Dark forms moved back and forth under the trees, the bells of hobbled mustangs ringing in the forest. Coyotes howled in the night as the campfire burned red, casting shadows on the blanket-covered Indians. The wind moaned and lulled in the cedars. Langford lay back in his blankets, gazing at the bright stars through the branches. The strangeness and wildness of it all overwhelmed him, stirring emotions he tried to suppress. He would have loved this life if he hadn't believed his time was short. Justice's influence pushed away the sadness, and Langford flung it aside with resentment. Sleep eluded him, fever burning his body. He sat up, seeking distraction by staring at the campfire. Time passed, and only 3 people remained in sight. Justice nodding off, Eshta, and a slender dark figure. A second glance revealed it was Mescal. He was taken aback by her sudden appearance, but even more so by the white band adorning her sleek black hair. It was a new addition to her attire, and it gave her the Navajo touch. He couldn't help but wonder its significance. Was it for her grandfather? How did a girl raised with Christian teachings come to wear something like this? Was it her desert blood? Langford was left with more questions than answers, adding to the mystery and romance. He drifted off to sleep with visions of Eshta and Mescal sitting by the fire, and August Justice silently nodding along. "Jack, Jack, wake up!" a voice interrupted his slumber. He groggily opened his eyes to see August Justice hovering over him, offering a cup of coffee. "Not feeling too well this morning, huh? Drink up and get on the wagon. We're headed to Seeping Springs tonight." Langford climbed aboard the wagon, laying down on the sacks. He was hit with a throbbing headache, one of his frequent migraines. The wagon creaked and clanked as they set off, jolting him awake at times. He watched as they descended into a narrow valley with the green cedar slope of the mountain on one side and the red wall with its spear-like pinnacles on the other. The scenery was the same throughout the day, with the valley getting longer and the red wall and green slope getting closer in the distance. They eventually came to a halt, with horses stamping their hooves and commands being barked. Langford refused any food, opting to lay still and sleep. He woke up the next morning feeling refreshed and rejuvenated, with his headache gone and his mind clear. The camp was set up beneath a towering red cliff, covered in lichen and dripping with water. A round pool sat below it, fed by a ditch that led water down the ridge to a nearby pond. Cattle waded in the pool, drinking up to their knees. Some lay on the hard-packed yellow clay, while others scaled the ridge and descended on either side. "Looks like you enjoyed that water," commented Justice when Langford approached the fire. "It's good, just a little salty. This is Seeping Springs, and it's mine. We call this ridge the Saddle. It dips between the wall and mountain, separating 2 valleys. The valley we're going through today is where my cattle roam. At the other end is Silver Cup Spring, also mine. Keep your eyes open, lad." The beginning of the day had been vastly different. The sky was as blue as the sea, and the valley nestled between the wall and mountain. Langford sat beside Justice on the seat, facing the descent. The Navajos led the way on their horses, a colorful curve on the trail. The white-domed wagons followed behind. Justice pointed to a newborn calf hidden under a bush of sage. "That's what I hate to see. The mother's gone for water, and wolves and lions roam this valley. We lose hundreds of calves this way." As far as Langford could see, red, white, and black cattle dotted the valley. "If not overstocked, this range is the best in Utah," said Justice. "I say Utah, but it's really Arizona. To us Mormons, the Grand Canyon marks the line. There's enough browse here to feed 100,000 cattle, but water's the thing. During some seasons, the springs almost dry up, but Silver Cup holds up well enough for my cattle," Justice informed Langford. Langford observed the tufts of grass scattered far apart on the yellow earth. It was evident that there was enough nourishment in every 2 feet of ground to support only one tuft. "What's that?" asked Langford, noticing a rolling cloud of dust with black bobbing borders. "Wild mustangs," replied Justice. "There are probably 5,000 on the mountain, and they are becoming a nuisance. They're almost as bad as sheep on the browse, and I should tell you that if sheep pass over a range once, the cattle will starve. The mustangs are becoming too abundant. There are also several bands of wild horses." "What's the difference between wild horses and mustangs?" "I haven't figured that out yet. Some say the Spaniards left horses here 300 years ago. Wild? They are wilder than any naturally wild animal that ever ran on 4 legs. Wait until you get a look at Silvermane or Whitefoot. What are they? Wild stallions. Silvermane is an iron gray with a silver mane, the most beautiful horse I have ever seen. Whitefoot is an old black shaggy demon with one white foot. Both stallions ought to be killed. They fight my horses and lead off the mares. I had a chance to shoot Silvermane on the way over this trip, but he looked so splendid that I just laid down my rifle. Can they run? Asked Langford eagerly, with the eyes of a man who loved a horse. Run? Whew! Just you wait until you see Silvermane cover ground. He can look over his shoulder at you and beat any horse in this country. The Navajos have given up catching him as a bad job. Why, here, Jack, quick, get out your rifle, coyotes. Justice pulled on the reins and pointed to one side. Langford spotted 3 grayish, sharp-nosed beasts sneaking off in the sage, and he reached back for the rifle. As Justice whistled, the coyotes stopped in their tracks. Langford pulled the trigger, and the bullet kicked up a cloud of dust just above the fleeing animals. "That rifle sure spangs," exclaimed Justice. "It's good to hear it. Jack, you shot too high. That's the problem with city slickers who have never hunted before. They can't aim low enough. You gotta aim lower than you think. Look, there's another coyote on this side. Aim for him and shoot low and quick. Too high again." This is how August and Langford fell behind the other wagons. Justice became more talkative the closer they got to his home. He shared information about the cattle, the range, the Mustangs, the Navajos, and the desert. Justice loved to talk. He had said he wasn't a gifted storyteller, but he certainly had the gift of gab. The sun was setting as they climbed a ridge. A short climb and a long turn to the right brought them under a bold spur of the mountain which blocked out the northwest. They set up camp in a grove of trees that Langford had never seen before. A sparkling spring flowed from under a boulder, a welcome sight and sound for weary travelers. A silver cup hung in a niche in the rock. "Jack, no one knows how old this cup is or anything about it. We named the spring after it Silver Cup. The strange thing is that the cup has never been lost or stolen. But could any desert man, outlaw, or Indian take it away after drinking from it?" The cup was dented and scratched, shiny on the sides, moss-covered on the bottom. When Langford drank from it, he understood. That night there was rowdy laughter around the campfire. Snap Justice played his Jew's harp and sang. The younger braves were stirred to dance by someone, and they moved in and out of the firelight singing Hoya Hiya Howya while stamping and swinging their arms. Snap's Jew's harp caught the attention of several of the braves, who repeatedly asked him for it. The Mormon reluctantly lent it to a curious Indian who, in trying to play it, went through awkward motions and made strange sounds that his companions found amusing. They fought over possession of the instrument, and Snap, becoming concerned for its welfare, jumped into the fray. He fought hard to regain the harp, tossing the Navajos about like shuttlecocks. Eventually he got the harp and tried to break away, but the braves caught him, threw him to the ground, and went through his pockets. August, Justice, and Langford found the incident amusing, as it was surprising to see serious Mormons and silent Navajos capable of mirth. After a good night's sleep, Langford woke up eager to know what the day would bring. August soberly told him to wait, and they rode out of the gray pocket in the ridge and began to climb. Langford grew impatient with the monotonous ascent, but they continued to climb steadily. Suddenly August said, "Now, Jack," and Langford gasped as he saw a red world. His eyes seemed to be bathed in blood. The ground was barren and covered in red scales, sloping downward towards a large irregular crevice that zigzagged through the plain. To the right it twisted under a black-timbered plateau, while to the left it straightened out towards a V-shaped opening in the wall that led to a mountain range. Beyond the crevice lay a vast, limitless expanse of white sands, purple plains, and distant mesas. It was the shimmering, dust-covered desert. "This is the real deal," Justice explained. "This is Windy Slope. That black line over there is the Grand Canyon of Arizona. On the other side is the Painted Desert where the Navajos live. Coconina Mountain can be seen to the right, and the wall on our left rises to the Vermilion Cliffs. Look while you can, because soon you won't be able to see." "Why not?" Langford asked. "Wind, sand, dust, gravel, and pebbles. Watch out for your eyes," Justice warned. Langford barely had time to process the warning before he saw the train of Indians trailing down the slope disappear into the red clouds. The white wagons were soon gone too.